Ambassador Daniel Carter stepped off the shuttle and took his first breath of alien air. The atmosphere on Nexus Prime was thin and cold, but he barely noticed. His eyes were fixed on the massive structure ahead of him. The council hall rose from the ground like a mountain made of glass and metal. It was the most important building in the entire galaxy, and today he would walk through its doors as the first human to ever address the Galactic Council. Daniel was 43 years old, with gray starting to show at his temples. He had spent 20 years as a diplomat on Earth, solving conflicts between nations that had hated each other for centuries. His superiors had chosen him for this mission because he never gave up and he never lost his temper. Those qualities would be tested today. A Varadi guard approached him. The alien stood 8 feet tall, with a body covered in hard black plates. Its head was shaped like a triangle with large compound eyes that reflected Daniel's face 1,000 times. The guard clicked its mandibles and spoke through a translation device hanging from its neck. "Human delegate, you will follow." Daniel nodded and walked behind the guard. His heart was beating fast, but his face showed nothing. He had studied the Varadi for months before this trip. They were the most powerful species in the Galactic Council. They had been traveling between stars when humans were still living in caves. Their empire stretched across 1,000 worlds. Their military had never lost a war. The hallway inside the council hall seemed to stretch forever. The walls were lined with statues of alien leaders from species Daniel could not name. Each statue was ancient, carved from stone that had been quarried on worlds that no longer existed. Humans had no statues here. Humans were newcomers. Children compared to these ancient civilizations. Daniel thought about his wife Laura, waiting back on Earth. She had held him tight before he left, and told him to be careful. Their daughter Emma was only 7 years old, and their son Jack was 5. Daniel had promised them he would come home with good news. He intended to keep that promise. The council chamber was circular and vast. 12 platforms rose from the floor, each one holding representatives from a different species. The Varadi platform was the highest. High Chancellor Zethrak sat there like a king on his throne. Watching Daniel enter with those cold, compound eyes, Daniel walked to the center of the chamber, where a small platform waited for him. He was alone. Earth had been allowed to send only one representative. Looking up at the 12 platforms surrounding him, Daniel felt very small. "You may speak human," Zethrak said. His voice was harsh and clicking, but the translation came through clearly. Daniel took a deep breath. "High Chancellor, honored members of the Galactic Council, I come before you today as a representative of Earth and all humanity. We are a young species. We discovered faster than light travel only 18 months ago, but we come to you with open hands and open hearts." He paused and looked around at the alien faces watching him. Some seemed curious. Others seemed bored. The Varadi showed nothing at all. Humanity wishes to join the galactic community as a friend and partner. We offer trade, cultural exchange, and cooperation in scientific research. We ask only for the chance to prove ourselves worthy of your trust. Daniel presented Earth's formal petition for associate membership. He explained humanity's history, their achievements, their hopes for the future. He spoke for nearly an hour, pouring everything he had into his words. When he finished, the chamber was silent. High Chancellor Zethrak leaned forward on his platform. "The council will consider your petition. You will wait." Daniel was escorted to a small room and left alone. Hours passed. He tried to eat the food they brought him, but it tasted like nothing. He tried to sleep, but his mind would not stop racing. What Daniel did not know was that the council had already made their decision. In a secret session held before he even arrived, the Varadi had presented their findings about humanity. Their scientists had studied human biology and psychology. What they found had terrified them. Humans were adaptive in ways no other species could match. Their immune systems could defeat almost any disease. Their bodies could survive extreme temperatures, pressure changes, and radiation levels that would kill other beings. But more importantly, their minds were different. Humans did not simply endure hardship. They grew stronger from it. They turned pain into motivation and defeat into determination. "High Chancellor, Zethrak had shown the Council simulations of what would happen if humanity was allowed to spread across the galaxy. Within 1,000 years, they would outnumber every other species combined. Within 2,000 years, they would dominate all known space. The Virati had ruled the galaxy for 100,000 years. They would not allow these primitives to take their place. The vote was unanimous. Humanity would not be allowed to join the galactic community. More than that, humanity needed to be taught a lesson they would never forget. Guards came for Daniel in the middle of the night. They dragged him from his room and threw him into a cell. When he demanded to know what was happening, they did not answer. His trial was held the next morning. It lasted 17 minutes. The charges were espionage and hostile intent against the Galactic Council. The evidence was fabricated, documents and recordings that Daniel had never seen before. He tried to defend himself, but no one would listen. High Chancellor Zethrak pronounced the sentence himself: death by disintegration. To be carried out immediately and broadcast to all human worlds. Daniel stood before the execution device with his hands bound behind his back. He was not afraid. He was angry. He thought about Laura and Emma and Jack. He thought about all the humans who would watch this moment. He thought about everything humanity could have been if they had been given a chance. A camera drone floated in front of his face. It's broadcasting his image across the stars. Daniel looked directly into it and spoke his final words: never forgive them. The disintegration beam activated. Daniel Carter, first human ambassador to the stars, ceased to exist. On Earth, the broadcast ended. Silence fell across the planet. In government buildings and private homes, in crowded cities and quiet farms, humanity watched their representative die. Then the silence ended, and something else began. Laura Carter stood in her living room, with tears streaming down her face. Her children did not understand what they had seen. She gathered them in her arms and held them tight. Outside her window, she could hear people shouting. She could hear sirens beginning to wail. She could hear the sound of a world waking up to rage. The Galactic Council had wanted to teach humanity a lesson. They had succeeded. But the lesson humanity learned was not the one they intended. The stars were watching. The galaxy was waiting. And humanity was no longer asking for permission to join. They were coming to take their place. The footage of Daniel Dalber's death played on every screen across Earth, in New York and Tokyo. In London and Cairo, in small villages and massive cities, humanity watched together. They saw their ambassador speak his final words. They saw him vanish in a flash of light, and they felt something ancient wake up inside them. Admiral Grace. Sullivan was sitting in her office at Fleet Command when the broadcast ended. She was 61 years old, with silver hair cut short and eyes that had seen too many battles. She had served in the military for 40 years, fighting wars on Earth that now seemed small and meaningless. She had never cried in her entire career. Today, she felt tears running down her face. Her hands were shaking as she reached for her communicator. She called her aide and spoke in a voice that did not sound like her own. "Get me the Joint Chiefs. Get me the President. Get me everyone." Within 3 hours, the United Nations convened an emergency session. Representatives from every nation on Earth gathered in the Great Assembly Hall. The room was usually filled with arguments and disagreements. Today there was only silence and shared grief. President Marcus Webb walked to the podium. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and a face that usually carried an easy smile. There was no smile today. His jaw was tight and his eyes were burning. "We have all seen what happened," he began. His voice carried across the silent hall. "We sent a man of peace to ask for friendship. They murdered him. They called it justice. They broadcast it to our homes so our children could watch." He paused and looked out at the assembly. Every face was turned toward him. The Galactic Council believes we are weak. They believe we are primitives who can be frightened into submission. They believe that killing one of us will make the rest of us bow. His voice grew louder. They are wrong. The assembly erupted in cheers. Representatives who had argued with each other for decades were now standing together. United by rage and purpose, President Webb raised his hand for silence. "Today, I am announcing the largest military mobilization in human history. Every factory that can be converted to military production will be converted. Every scientist who can contribute to our defense will be given resources beyond their dreams. Every man and woman who wishes to serve will be given the chance. He leaned forward on the podium. We are also beginning a new initiative, Project Prometheus. Its goal is simple. We will find a way to fight back against species that have been waging war for 100,000 years. We will find their weaknesses. We will build weapons they have never imagined, and we will make them regret the day they touched one of our own. Dr. Nathan Brooks watched the president's speech from his laboratory at the Advanced Weapons Research Division. He was 38 years old, with messy brown hair and glasses that were always slightly crooked. He had spent his career studying theoretical physics, working on problems that had no practical application. His colleagues called him a dreamer. 2 hours after the speech ended, men in military uniforms arrived at his lab. They told him he had been selected to lead Project Prometheus. He would have unlimited funding, unlimited personnel, and access to every piece of technology humanity possessed. His mission was to make Earth capable of fighting the galaxy. Nathan stared at them for a long moment. Then he took off his glasses, cleaned them on his shirt, and put them back on. When do I start? Across human space, the response was the same. Mars had been colonized for only 15 years, but its governor immediately pledged every resource the red planet had. The mining stations in the asteroid belt doubled their production schedules. The research outposts on Europa and Titan sent their best scientists back to Earth. Private corporations converted their factories overnight. Companies that had been building cars were now building tanks. Companies that had been making consumer electronics were now making targeting systems. The economy of Earth transformed itself in weeks. Young people lined up at recruitment centers by the millions. They waited in lines that stretched for miles, eager to sign their names and join the fight. Old soldiers who had retired decades ago came out of their homes and volunteered to train the new generation. Admiral Grace Sullivan was appointed Supreme Commander of the United Earth Defense Force. She stood before her new command and looked at the young faces staring back at her. Most of them had never seen combat. Most of them had never even left Earth. But in their eyes she saw something that gave her hope. She saw fire. You have all seen what they did to Ambassador Carter, she said. You have all heard his final words. Never forgive them. I am here to tell you that we will not forgive. We will not forget. And we will not stop until every species in that council understands what it means to make an enemy of humanity. The training began immediately. Human soldiers learned to fight in environments they had never imagined. Zero-gravity combat. Underwater warfare. Operations on planets with crushing gravity or toxic atmospheres. They trained until their bodies broke, and then they trained some more. Meanwhile, Nathan Brooks and his team worked around the clock. They studied every piece of alien technology they could find. They analyzed the energy shields that protected Virati ships. They examined the weapons that had been used against human vessels. And slowly, piece by piece, they began to find weaknesses. High Chancellor Zethrak watched the human response from Nexus Prime. His advisors told him not to worry. Humans were primitives. They had only known space travel for 2 decades. What could they possibly do against civilizations that had been mastering warfare since before Earth's sun was born? Zethrak was not so certain. He had studied the footage of Daniel Carter's execution many times. He had watched the human's face in those final moments. There was no fear there. There was no despair. There was only defiance and rage. The High Chancellor had conquered hundreds of species in his long career. He had seen them beg. He had seen them surrender. He had seen them accept their fate with quiet resignation. He had never seen anything like what he saw in Daniel Carter's eyes. For the first time in his life, he felt something he did not recognize. It took him several days to understand what it was. It was doubt. 18 months passed. Earth continued to build and train and prepare. The galaxy watched and waited. Some species whispered that humanity would burn itself out before it ever reached the stars. Others were not so sure. On the anniversary of Daniel Carter's death, Admiral Grace Sullivan addressed humanity one final time before the fleet launched. Tomorrow we go to war. Some of us will not come back, but every one of us will fight with Daniel Carter's words in our hearts. Never forgive them. Never forget. And never, ever give up. The fleet launched at dawn. Thousands of ships rising from Earth and Mars and every human station in the solar system. They formed up in perfect formation and pointed themselves toward the stars. The Galactic Council had started this war with an execution. Humanity intended to finish it. The human fleet emerged from fold space. At the edge of Virati territory, one moment there was empty darkness. The next moment there were 300 warships hanging in the void like angry stars. Admiral Grace Sullivan stood on the bridge of the Relentless, humanity's first dreadnought. The ship was massive and ugly, built for war rather than beauty. Its hull was covered in thick armor plates and bristling with weapons that Dr. Nathan Brooks and his team had designed in 18 months of sleepless nights. Every inch of the vessel had been created with one purpose in mind: to kill. Grace looked at the tactical display in front of her. Red dots marked the position of the Virati Border Patrol. 15 cruisers, each one 3 times the size of any human vessel. Their ships were elegant and curved, designed by a civilization that had been building starships for 100,000 years. They looked like predators swimming through the darkness. Lieutenant Kevin Marshall sat at the tactical station. He was 26 years old, barely more than a boy, but his mind worked faster than anyone Grace had ever met. He had spent the entire journey running simulations of this battle. He knew every strength and weakness of the Virati vessels. "Admiral, the Virati are hailing us," the communications officer reported. Grace nodded. "Put them on screen." The face of Fleet Master Verkith appeared before them. He was a typical Virati, all black plates and compound eyes and clicking mandibles. His translation device rendered his words in a cold, mechanical voice. "Human vessels, you have entered Virati space without authorization. You will power down your weapons and surrender immediately. If you comply, you will be granted quick deaths. If you resist, you will suffer." Grace looked at the alien face on her screen. She thought about Daniel Carter standing in that execution chamber. She thought about his final words echoing across human space. She thought about the 40 million volunteers who had signed up to fight after watching him die. "Fleet Master Verkith," she said calmly, "I am Admiral Grace Sullivan of the United Earth Defense Force. 18 months ago, your council murdered our ambassador. Today we have come to deliver our response." She turned to Kevin Marshall. "Lieutenant, you may fire when ready." Kevin had been waiting for this moment his entire life. His fingers moved across his console, and the Relentless opened fire. The first shots were not aimed at the Virati ships. They were aimed at empty space, releasing a cloud of specialized particles that Dr. Nathan Brooks had designed specifically for this battle. The particles spread outward in an invisible wave, carrying a rotating frequency pulse that disrupted energy, shield harmonics. The Virati did not understand what was happening. Their shields flickered and failed. For the first time in centuries, ships were exposed. Then the real weapons fired. Kinetic rounds traveling at a fraction of light. Speed slammed into Virati hulls. Plasma torpedoes burned through armor that was supposed to be impenetrable. Directed energy beams cut through bulkheads and reactors in crew compartments. The first Virati cruiser exploded in a ball of white fire. Then the second. Then the third. Fleet Master Verkith screamed orders at his surviving ships. They tried to return fire, but their targeting systems were confused by electronic warfare that Kevin Marshall had designed during the long journey. Their shots went wide, hitting nothing but empty space. The Virati tried to run. Their ships were faster than human vessels, designed for quick strikes and rapid retreats. But Kevin had anticipated this. He had plotted their escape routes before the battle even began. Human ships were waiting at every exit point. The battle lasted for hours. For hours of fire and death and destruction. Human ships took heavy damage. Entire crews were lost when their vessels were torn apart by Virati weapons that finally found their marks. But the humans did not retreat. They did not falter. They fought with a fury that the Virati had never encountered. When the last shot was fired, 11 Virati cruisers were debris floating in the void. 4 had surrendered, their crews too shocked to continue fighting. The human fleet had lost nearly a third of its ships. Over 8,000 soldiers were dead. Grace Sullivan looked at the wreckage on her tactical display. She felt no joy. She felt no triumph. She only felt tired and sad and determined to keep going. "Get me a channel to Nexus Prime," she said quietly. "I want to send a message to High Chancellor Zethrak." The communications officer worked his console. "Channel open, Admiral." Grace stood straight and looked into the camera. She knew that billions of beings across the galaxy would see this transmission. She chose her words carefully. "High Chancellor Zethrak, this is Admiral Grace Sullivan. Today, your border patrol attempted to stop the human fleet. They failed. 11 of your cruisers are destroyed. 4 have surrendered. This is our response to the murder of Ambassador Daniel Carter." She paused and let her words sink in. "You believed that killing one of us would frighten the rest. You were wrong. You believed that we were primitives who could not challenge your power. You were wrong. You believed that this war would be easy. You were wrong about that too." Her voice grew harder. "We're coming for you. We are coming for your council. We are coming for everyone who voted to kill our ambassador, and we will not stop until justice is served." She leaned forward slightly. "Daniel Carter's last words were never forgive them. We intend to honor those words. Prepare yourself, High Chancellor. Humanity is at your door." The transmission ended. Grace turned away from the camera and walked to the observation window. Outside, the wreckage of Virati ships tumbled slowly through space. Fires still burned in some of the hulls. Fed by oxygen leaking from broken compartments, Kevin Marshall approached her carefully. "Admiral, what are your orders?" Grace did not turn around. "Send word to Earth. Tell them we have won the first battle. Tell them our losses. Tell them to send more ships." She finally turned to face her tactical officer. There were tears in her eyes, but her voice was steady. "Tell them this is only the beginning." On Nexus Prime, High Chancellor Zethrak watched the human transmission in silence. His advisors stood around him, waiting for him to speak. None of them dared to say anything. The reports from the Border Patrol were impossible. Virati ships did not lose battles. Virati shields did not fail. Virati warriors did not surrender. And yet all of these things had happened. Zethrak thought about the simulations. Scientists had shown him 2 years ago. Humanity spreading across the galaxy. Humanity growing stronger with each generation. Humanity eventually dominating all known space. He had ordered Daniel Carter's execution to prevent that future. He had believed that killing the human ambassador would show humanity their place in the universe. Instead, he had created something far worse. He had given them a reason to fight. High Chancellor rose from his throne and looked at his advisors with cold, compound eyes. "Summon the council. We are at war." The galaxy would never be the same. 5 years had passed since the first battle at the Virati border. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. Human forces had pushed deep into council space, conquering world after world. The flag of Earth now flew on planets that had never seen a human face before. Commander Patricia Lane stood on the surface of Kethros 7, watching her soldiers secure the last Virati outpost. She was 34 years old, with short black hair and a scar running down her left cheek. She had earned that scar on her 3rd campaign, fighting hand-to-hand against a Virati warrior twice her size. She had won that fight. She had won every fight since. Kethros 7 was a beautiful world with purple skies and forests of silver trees. It was also a world that had suffered for 10,000 years under Virati rule. The native Kethrosi were small beings with pale blue skin and large dark eyes. They had been slaves since before humanity learned to write. A group of Kethrosi elders approached Patricia slowly. They moved with the careful steps of people who had spent their entire lives expecting punishment. Their leader was ancient, his blue skin wrinkled and faded with age. He stopped a few feet away from Patricia and fell to his knees. "Please," he said through a translation device, "we will serve. We will obey. Do not hurt our children. Patricia felt her heart break. She knelt down so she was at eye level with the old alien. "Stand up," she said gently. "You are not slaves anymore. No one is going to hurt you or your children. We did not come here to conquer. We came here to free you." The elder stared at her with those large dark eyes. He did not seem to understand. "Free," he whispered. "We do not know this word." Patricia reached out and took his hand. It was thin and fragile. The hand of someone who had worked hard his entire life for masters who did not care if he lived or died. "You will learn," she said. News of the liberation spread across Cathrosi's settlements. At first, the people were afraid. They had seen conquerors before. Conquerors always brought pain. But these humans were different. They shared their food. They treated the sick. They asked nothing in return. When the Cathrosi finally understood that they were truly free, many of them wept. They had believed such kindness was impossible. They had believed that cruelty was the natural way of the universe. The humans showed them a different truth. Thousands of light years away, High Chancellor Zethrak faced a council that was falling apart. The war was going badly. Human forces seemed to be everywhere at once, striking where they were least expected and vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. 3 species had already withdrawn from the war. The Malori claimed their homeworld needed defending. The Krath said their economy could not support continued conflict. The truth was simpler. They were afraid. They had seen what humans could do, and they wanted no part of it. The Yelthari ambassador rose to speak. The Yelthari were an ancient species of philosophers, beings of pure thought, who had transcended physical form millennia ago. They appeared as shimmering clouds of golden light. "This council made a grave error," the Yelthari said. "We murdered an innocent man and called it justice. We started a war we cannot win. I call upon the council to seek peace with humanity before it is too late." Zethrak slammed his armored fist against his throne. "Peace? You would have us surrender to these primitives? You would have us admit that we were wrong?" "We were wrong," the Yelthari replied calmly. "The execution of Daniel Carter was a crime. Every death in this war is a consequence of that crime. How many more must die before we accept the truth?" The council chamber erupted in argument. Species that had been allies for thousands of years now screamed at each other. The unity that had held the galaxy together for so long was shattering. Zethrak watched the chaos with growing desperation. He had ruled the council for 300 years. He had never seen anything like this. That night, he summoned his most trusted intelligence officer. Her name was Shethra, and she had served him since before humans discovered fire. She was ruthless and clever and completely loyal. "The war cannot be won through force alone," Zethrak told her. "We must find another way. Humanity's greatest strength is their unity. We must break it." Shethra's compound eyes gleamed in the darkness. "I have already begun, High Chancellor. Human society is not as unified as it appears. There are those among them who crave power. There are those who believe the war has gone too far. There are those who can be bought." She presented a list of names. Human officers who had expressed doubts about the war. Politicians who wanted peace at any price. Business leaders who saw opportunity in collaboration. At the top of the list was a name that made Zethrak click his mandibles with satisfaction. Vice Admiral Christopher Blake. He was one of humanity's most decorated officers, a hero of a dozen battles. He was also ambitious and arrogant and resentful of Admiral Sullivan's command. "Approach him carefully," Zethrak ordered. "Offer him whatever he wants. Governorship of star systems. Wealth beyond imagination. Power over his own kind. Find his price and pay it." Shethra bowed. "It will be done, High Chancellor." The seeds of betrayal were planted. Over the following months, secret communications passed between council agents and human traders. Promises were made. Deals were struck. A network of collaborators grew in the shadows of the human military. Christopher Blake received his first message on a secure channel that should have been impossible to hack. The council offered him command of 3 star systems if he would turn against his own people at the critical moment. They promised him that humanity would lose the war eventually. They promised him that he could be on the winning side. Blake read the message 3 times. He thought about Grace Sullivan, who had been promoted above him despite his superior record. He thought about the politicians on Earth who questioned his decisions. He thought about all the recognition he deserved but never received. He sent his reply at midnight. "Tell me what you need me to do on Earth." President Marcus Webb addressed the United Nations on the 5th anniversary of Daniel Carter's death. The war was going well, he told them. Victory was within reach. Soon, the Council would face justice for their crimes. The Assembly cheered. Flags waved. Humanity celebrated another year of survival and success. No one noticed the shadows gathering at the edges of their triumph. No one suspected that enemies walked among them. No one imagined that the greatest threat to humanity would come not from alien weapons, but from human hearts. Admiral Grace Sullivan stood at her window looking up at the stars. She had won every battle she fought. She had never lost a ship to tactical error. But lately she felt something she could not explain. A cold feeling in her chest. A sense that something was wrong. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself the war was almost won. She was wrong. The assault on Nexus. Diplomat Prime began on the 7th anniversary of Daniel Carter's death. Admiral Grace Sullivan had chosen this date deliberately. She wanted the Council to remember what they had done. She wanted them to understand why humanity had come. Grace stood on the bridge of the Vengeance. Humanity's newest and most powerful flagship. The ship was enormous, a floating city of metal and weapons and rage. Its hull carried the names of every human who had died in the war. Over 40 million names etched into the armor. A memorial that would fly into battle. The human fleet numbered over 2,000 ships. They had come from every corner of human space. Veterans who had fought since the beginning flew alongside young pilots on their first mission. All of them shared the same purpose. All of them remembered Daniel Carter's final words. Nexus Prime hung before them like a jewel in the darkness. The Council's homeworld was beautiful, a planet of silver oceans and golden continents. Massive space stations orbited around it, bristling with weapons. The Council had gathered everything they had left for this final defense. Admiral Lieutenant Kevin Marshall reported from his tactical station. Enemy forces are forming up. One count over 3,000 vessels. They outnumber us significantly. Grace nodded calmly. She had expected this. The Council was fighting for survival. They would throw everything they had into this battle. All ships. This is Admiral Sullivan. Today we end this war. Today we bring justice for Daniel Carter and for every human who has fallen. Fight well. Fight hard. And never forget why we are here. The battle began. Human ships surged forward in perfect formation. Council vessels opened fire with weapons that had been refined over 100,000 years of warfare. Space itself seemed to burn as energies beyond imagination. Clashed in the darkness, Grace watched the tactical display with cold focus. Her ships were taking losses, but they were pushing through. The Council fleet was falling back toward Nexus Prime, exactly as she had planned. Then everything went wrong. A section of the human fleet broke formation without warning. 30 ships that should have been providing cover fire suddenly turned their weapons on their own allies. Grace watched in horror as the Vengeance took hits from vessels flying the Earth flag. What is happening? She demanded. Kevin Marshall's face had gone pale. Admiral, those ships are under Vice Admiral Blake's command. They are firing on us deliberately. Christopher Blake's face appeared on the main screen. He was smiling, a cold and satisfied smile that made Grace's blood freeze. Hello, Admiral Sullivan. I wanted you to know who ended your precious war. The Council has offered me a better future than Earth ever could. 3 star systems under my command. Wealth and power beyond imagination. All I had to do was remove you at the critical moment. Grace stared at the face of the traitor. She thought about all the battles they had fought together. She thought about the soldiers who were dying right now because of his betrayal. You've sold out your own species, she said quietly. For power. For wealth. Daniel Carter died for humanity, and you betrayed everything he stood for. Blake laughed. Daniel Carter was a fool. He believed in peace and cooperation. Look where that got him. I believe in survival. When this war ends, I will still be standing. Can you say the same? He cut the transmission. His ships continued to fire on the loyal human forces. The battle descended into chaos. Human fought human while Council forces regrouped and pressed their advantage. The Vengeance took hit after hit, its armor cracking under the assault. Grace refused to retreat. She refused to surrender. She had not come this far to fail now. Gavin, she said, can you get me a channel to all human ships, including Blake's fleet? Kevin worked his console frantically. Yes, Admiral. Channel open. Grace took a deep breath. Then she did something she had never done before. She played Daniel Carter's execution. The full recording broadcast across every frequency. Every human ship, loyal and traitor alike, saw their ambassador stand before the council. They heard his final words. They watched him die. This is why we fight, Grace said over the recording. This is what we are fighting for. Every human who has ever lived, every human who will ever be born. We fight because they tried to break us, and we refuse to break. Christopher Blake has forgotten that. Have you? The effect was immediate. On Blake's own flagship, crew members turned against their officers. They had joined the Navy to avenge Daniel Carter, not to betray his memory. Mutiny spread through the traitor fleet like fire. Blake screamed orders that no one obeyed. His ships fell into confusion as loyal humans seized control. Within an hour, his fleet had collapsed. Blake himself was captured by his own crew and placed in chains. Grace did not waste time on satisfaction. She rallied her remaining forces and pushed toward Nexus Prime, the Council fleet, which had expected an easy victory, now faced a human force united by rage and purpose. The final battle lasted 6 more hours. Human ships fought through orbital defenses that should have been impenetrable. They landed troops on space stations that had never known invasion. They pushed and pushed until nothing remained between them and the council chambers. Grace Sullivan walked through the halls of the council building with a squad of soldiers at her back. The corridors were empty. The alien servants had fled. Only silence remained. She found the council members gathered in their great chamber, the same chamber where Daniel Carter had been condemned to death. High Chancellor Zethrak sat on his throne, surrounded by the representatives of species that had ruled the galaxy for millennia. Grace walked to the center of the room and looked up at them. She was covered in blood and dust. Her uniform was torn. Her face was exhausted, but her eyes burned with a fire that made ancient beings look away. 7 years ago, you murdered our ambassador in this room, she said. You believed it would frighten us into submission. Instead, you united us. You made us strong. You gave us a purpose. She pointed at High Chancellor Zethrak. You will face trial for your crimes. Every council member who voted for Daniel Carter's execution will answer for what they did. The Galactic Council is dissolved. The species you have oppressed for millennia are free. Zethrak rose from his throne. His compound eyes showed something Grace had never expected to see in a Virati. Fear, and what of us? He asked, what will humanity do with those who remain? Grace thought about Daniel Carter. She thought about his wife Laura, who had waited 7 years for justice. She thought about his children, who had grown up without a father. We will give you something you never gave us, she said. A fair trial, a chance to defend yourself. Justice instead of murder. She turned and walked away. The war was over. Humanity had won. 1 year later, a memorial was unveiled on Nexus Prime. It showed a human hand reaching toward the stars, cast in bronze that would last forever. At its base were words that every being in the galaxy would learn to understand. We remember. We endure. We never forgive. Laura Carter stood before the memorial with her children beside her. Emma was 14 now. Jack was 12. They had grown up in the shadow of their father's death. Now they stood in the light of his legacy. Laura touched the bronze hand gently. Tears ran down her face, but she was smiling. We did it, Daniel, she whispered. We made them pay. Somewhere among the stars, humanity continued to grow. They built new worlds and new alliances. They helped the species that had been oppressed and punished those who had done the oppressing. They never forgot what they had learned. They never forgot what they were capable of. And they never, ever forgave those who had tried to destroy them. The galaxy had a new dominant species now, and they were just getting started.